My name is Allison McIntosh. I'm a research manager at the Parkland Institute, but I'm also an activist for the Green New Deal here in Edmonton, so it's a real honor and a pleasure to introduce our morning plenary guest. I'd like to start out with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered here today on Treaty 6 territory on the land traditionally known as the Musquatchie-Waskahigan, the traditional meeting grounds for many Indigenous peoples and homes of the Plains Cree, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Plains, Anishinaabe. Musquatchie-Waskahigan is a Cree word that translates to Beaver Hills House. The neighborhood that we're currently in, that has come to be known as Strathcona, is traditionally Métis territory, and the southern part of the city should be Papaschase Reserve. I think it's important to invoke our obligations to treaty as we're talking about a Green New Deal, because as you know, Green New Deal is not just environmental reforms, it's also an environmental, social, and economic transition that is just and leaves no one behind. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Damon Drummer is an organizer and civic innovator whose grassroots work in Chicago has been recognized by the Obama White House, Code for America, and the Aspen Institute. He's currently co-founder and executive director of the New Consensus, a leading organization shaping the Green New Deal in the United States. An alumnus of Morehouse College, Damon lives in Chicago with his wife and their daughter. So Damon is also going to have some questions for the audience, so be prepared to participate. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. Thank you so much.
Good. Got it. And if I can remember what I need to do at this point, I think I press present. Is that right?
Yes.
There we are, it worked. In my bio it says I used to teach kids computer science, or rather teens, high school students, and it's always this stuff that confuses me. But good morning, happy Sunday. You know, I love the warm, I'm from Chicago, this is very warm weather, and I love it. I took my hat off, I'm like sweating right now. But I'd like to thank Trevor and the Parkland Institute for the invitation to join this magnificent discussion. And I'm here to talk about the Green New Deal. And my aim this morning is to outline what we mean at New Consensus by the Green New Deal. And I'll do that by weaving in some experiences and stories over the last year or so since we, vaulted the Green New Deal into the American national discourse anew. It's not a new idea, but we did vault it anew. And I'll also share some experiences and stories that brought me to this work in the first place. I was not a climate activist. I'm more on the economic transformation side of things, as you can see from the bio. And so where appropriate, I might connect some of my work in the past to the present work. Because of course the Green New Deal is a transformation of our economy. It's also aggressive and robust climate action and a renewing of the social contract as well. And I'll go through that using some old photos, but I want to move as quickly as possible to spend as much time as possible discussing some questions that I have. There are very smart people in the room, and I love taking opportunities to field answers to my questions. I am notorious for walking into presentations and inverting the whole thing. I'm not going to do that here too much, but I want to get to the discussion part of this presentation. But I have some questions. In light of these conversations that we've had over this weekend, what does the substance of the Green New Deal, with this call for climate action and economic transformation, what does the substance of the Green New Deal have to say to the fascist and authoritarian reality in the US and in other countries, right? It would be naive to think that it would all go away, but can it address some of the underlying grievances that are preyed upon, right, by the bad actors in our politics? I don't know, And to put it plainly, my assessment is that the politics that we have now, particularly in the US, will not deliver a Green New Deal. Right? So, excuse me, what? The politics that we have now. So does the Green New Deal present an opportunity to craft a collective identity around a shared purpose? If it does, is that a road that we actually want to walk down? And if not, what are some alternatives that we can explore to shape a politics that can inspire the collective action necessary and the shared vision and shared purpose necessary to make the Green New Deal not just technologically possible, but possible in a way that we can revive our economy and create more justice and equity for all. There is no equity without actual financial equity, right? So we'll get to all of that a little later. And because I forget which direction this mouse goes, there we go. But before I begin, I'd like to make a floor amendment to the title of my presentation. So Mobilizations, Moonshots, and Movements, the Promise of the Green New Deal. You know, a year into this work, it's only been a year, it's crazy. A little bit more than a year, but that's a very short period of time. When we talk about the Green New Deal, especially in Washington, D.C., a city I try to avoid actively, and I'll come back to why, we find ourselves in a strange position of answering questions. What's in it? Where are the details? Who's out? Who's in? How will you solve for every conceivable problem that will necessarily emerge in a transition, a just transition to a green and sustainable economy? What is your legislative strategy? What is the bill? How many bills will it take? And these are the types of questions you get when you talk about the Green New Deal. But I'd like to amend my presentation. This is not happening. Wait, did I do that right? Wait. You know what? I think it's rolling this. How ironic. I think it's,
Oh, there you go.
What
I
happened?
think you got to point it at this.
Oh, you know what? Is it cycling through? It's not cycling through here.
Oh.
That's so weird. Pause, please. You know what? What I'll do is, I think it's because I have this open.
Ooh, could you, is it in,
I'm sure they can edit this out. Yeah, it's cycling here. Here we go, resume slideshow. I'm so sorry. It was all my fault. No. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, I'll just have to pivot between notes and the screen. Okay. So when we talk about a Green New Deal, so again, the Green New Deal sounds final, right? When we talk about a Green New Deal, I think it opens the floor for a discussion. The Green New Deal sounds like legislation. A Green New Deal sounds like a conversation. And I'm very interested in having a conversation around what does it mean to reshape our economy to work for everyone, right? Where 90% of the gains don't go to the top 1% or so of our economy. A Green New Deal opens a question for what world do we want to live in? What is the social contract today? Can we update the operating system of the U.S. away from one that is built on slave owner math, right? We wonder why Trump got elected while losing the popular vote, right? So a Green New Deal is a space for imagining, and it's a space for ideas. And so I would like to call this presentation The Promise of a Green New Deal. And I don't have many slides, and the slides that I do have are just a bunch of old photos. And before I begin, I would like to talk a bit about the problems of the original New Deal from which we gather the namesake, though not the inspiration, and I'll come back to that, right? Contrary to popular belief, we are not proposing another New Deal, right? Our metaphor is a different episode in American history that is underreported and underappreciated. But people know what the New Deal is, and it means something in the American political imagination. And so, almost against our own best intentions and desires, we had to roll with it. The press loved it, right? So, I'll tell a brief story. Representative Ocasio-Cortez had won her primary and was in a general election running unopposed for New York 14th Congressional District. And when she announced the Green New Deal, it was in College Point. It's a neighborhood in New York that floods every time it rains hard. And that night, some of her team, comms people, and some of the campaign staff were huddling at a bar like, we can't call this thing the Green New Deal. That's just like the wrong thing to call it for all kinds of reasons. The first time I heard Green New Deal, I'm like, green? Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's for me, right? And that's what I hear a lot of, right? The content, though, remains popular. And so you roll with it because the best idea that folks could come up with was the American Genesis Project. It's like, no, that's not going to work. And I'm kind of joking, but you have to speak the language that people understand. So the New Deal does mean transformative structural change, right? And it has shaped and prefigured many of the economic realities that we take for granted today in the U.S. And so Green New Deal it was. But our controversy with the New Deal was that it was inherently racist. It explicitly cut out women. It explicitly cut out black people. It explicitly cut out Latinx people, and just go down the line. It literally built public projects on indigenous lands. It was a terrible, terrible thing, right? If you really look at it. And we can kind of go into the details. The question is, how did it become so terrible? Ira Katznelson has this amazing book called Fear Itself. And, in the book, he proposes that the New Deal is the American landscape that has been painted over and over again. What new could be said about the New Deal? And what he saw, among other things that were underappreciated in the history of the New Deal, was that the idea of race had been underreported, right? And not really explored as deeply as it should have been. And I think one of the reasons why is that in the imaginary around the New Deal, we have this idea of FDR, right? Legislating from the White House as the executive with his fireside chats, right? And bringing America into a new economic and social reality. When in fact, Congress played a veto and very active role in the New Deal. And within the Congress, although Democrats in their time had the majority of votes, Southern Democrats, the segregationists, the white supremacists, had a veto block that could block legislation coming out of that Democratic majority. And so Ira Katznelson cites some historians who say that the further south you went, right, the less you saw the economic impacts of the New Deal. Look at Mississippi. Look at where one of my good friends lives, Alabama, right? You see how that works, And the further north you went, the more you saw the nationalization of the Jim Crow, racist, segregationist, white supremacist regime. Look at Chicago, where I live, where you have the black belt and redlining that's still going on, right? And so the New Deal nationalized Jim Crow, right? And isolated black people, Latinx people. Again, farm workers weren't protected, right? Landowners who were farmers got access to the farm credit system, right? Which is like the Federal Reserve for farms, right? Sharecroppers did not have that access, right? And the list goes on and on. I can belabor this point even more, but we get the point, right? So the New Deal was deeply problematic. But the good news is that in calling this thing the Green New Deal, it forces us to contend and reckon with that history, to reckon with this idea that policy does shape outcomes, that you have the hood precisely because of the New Deal, and the fact that home loans weren't guaranteed to black people where black people lived. That is why even to this day, housing prices grow slower in black areas than they do everywhere else. In Chicago, we have black folks living unnaturally on the lakefront, right? And housing prices and real estate prices were depressed on the southern part of Chicago's lakefront because black people were there. That is because of a racist financial system, but it also has its roots in federal policy and who got loans that were guaranteed, right, by the federal government. And those are the types of conversations that we can now have anew and talk about why it matters that we structure the Green New Deal in a way that is preemptively inclusive, that prioritizes those who have been actively cut out of the prosperity of the country. So we're going to roll with Green New Deal. I think it's a learning moment, and we're going to dive into that. So I'm going to switch back to my notes here. The true inspiration for the Green New Deal, as we understand it, is actually the World War II mobilization, right? It's a fascinating history. And between the New Deal and the World War II mobilization, we see the two stimuli that inspired the DuPonts to really figure out how to curb government power against corporations, right? So these two things is fascinating, right? The neoliberal imagination that we have is a response to the New Deal and the World War II mobilization. Quite extraordinary. This photo is fascinating because at the beginning of America's full entry into World War II, the United States had the productive capacity, the industrial capacity to build about 3,000 airplanes per year. They were craft technologies, artisanal products, right? You know, you would build a propeller and you would do what you needed to do, and there was no like mass manufacturing of airplanes. President Roosevelt thought that in order to effectively wage combat overseas, the U.S. needed about 189,000 airplanes. So just do the math, how many years that would take if we assume no technology growth, right? And you'll get the arguments and people who say that we can't go to renewables. Anyway, I'll come back to that. Right? My friend who's from Alabama, he told me yesterday, he said, the people who are saying, we can't get there should just be more honest and say, I don't want to do that, right? Right? So folks thought that President Roosevelt was being wildly unrealistic. And they were right. Again, if we did the math, it's like, okay, how are we going to build 189,000 warplanes, in a short order? So Roosevelt did something interesting. He tapped some of the leaders of industry, some business leaders from the automotive industry. And these leaders assessed the capacity of factories of all types all across the country. And they retooled the entire country's manufacturing capacity and aligned it with the war effort to build Jeeps, helmets, backpacks, things like that, bullets. We get real creative when it's time to kill people. Anyway, and they retooled these factories, shared processes to produce what was needed to sustain the war effort. And the financial capital needed for this rapid scale up of this manufacturing capacity did not come from the banks. It came from the government. It came from the public sector. Not just as the final purchaser of the products, right, but as the initial investor. Indeed, the federal government built factories and then awarded contracts to companies to operate those factories, right? It's pretty much what China does with solar panels today that people keep thinking that there's some sort of ideological purity to buy solar panels from a country whose public sector builds the capacity to build solar panels for cheap, and then say we can't compete here in the U.S. or in North America. Anyway, so I'm way off my thing here. So when it's all said and done, a country that could produce only 3,000 warplanes before the end of the war had produced 300,000, exceeded the goal, 300,000 warplanes by the war's end. And to be clear, the history of the economic mobilization for World War II is challenging and complex. The government did take over factories that weren't honoring labor contracts, right? That'd be kind of interesting to see that today. The federal government also did take over factories where there were Wildcat Strikes, right? Worker protections weren't as high as they could have been. With much of the American public in the workforce, we saw children wandering the streets, getting into trouble, kind of presaging this two-parent working family and nothing for the young people to do. So it was very challenging. And it's shameful, of course, that the greatest mobilization of resources in the country's history, the U.S., has been around war. Now, we can't change that history retroactively, but we can use this history as an example and to learn lessons about what a mobilization to a green energy, clean energy economy could look like moving forward. At New Consensus, we see the Green New Deal as a World War II scale mobilization of all of the resources of our country, our industrial capacity, our ingenuity, our financial capital, all the resources of our country to transition to a clean and just energy economy. Again, public capital can crowd in private capital, right? The Green New Deal, as you know, proposes a set of solutions and national projects that match the scale, scope, and speed of climate breakdown. Upgrading every building in this country to the highest levels of energy efficiency, air quality, and water usage. There's some folks that we're talking to in the labor movement who say that replacing every lead pipe in the United States every lead pipe lead to the water main, is like a full employment program for the building trades, right? And people say it's a job killer. No, we actually don't have enough people to do it. That's actually the real problem, right? So that's like indefinite, predictable, full employment program for the building trades. Accelerate the adoption of clean and renewable energy. Restoring natural ecosystems, which will take labor, right? Research and develop, deploy technologies to decarbonize heavy industry and position the United States, and again, I'm speaking from the American perspective, as a world leader in clean manufacturing. Why not? Transform our food system. Right now we have a corporate industrial ag system that is run mostly on public subsidies to like 2 companies. The move to regenerative agriculture is required. That's tapping into the knowledge of our indigenous brothers and sisters who have been doing this for centuries and have been making this case and waging this fight for centuries to more sustainable agricultural methods. We're seeing a hollowing out of rural America, which kind of goes back to that question that I posed, because farmers in America today are being rendered as sharecroppers. There's a sociologist at Berkeley who says we're seeing the Negroization of the entire economy, where the Jim Crow playbook is being applied to everyone who is not in the top 10 to 1%. So we have to invest in America's productive capacity to produce the stuff we need to have a clean economy. These are electric vehicles, but not just autonomous electric vehicles circling the block waiting for somebody to jump in, right? We have to rethink how we use space. I mean, it's quite ambitious and quite capacious. But the parts that we need, the components that we need, the pipes that we need to upgrade, all of this requires labor. And we see a lot of opportunity in making that happen. So the sheer size and scale of this great effort means that the Green New Deal cannot leave any worker or any community behind. There are communities, it's a reality. I'm sure you are well aware of this reality, that are built around the economics of fossil fuels, right? No community can be left behind, right? So you have to have a substantive option. And we know human beings aren't Legos. My 2-year-old loves Legos. A little bit to do because I love Legos when I was a kid, but my 2-year-old loves Legos. But humans aren't Legos, so it's not like, oh, you are in the fossil fuel industry, now you're going to be installing solar panels. That's not how human beings operate. So we have to be very clear about what it means to transition and have those conversations. And I know y'all been a leader in some of those conversations. This is what the Green New Deal is all about. And what I think is interesting about this scenario from World War II is that there is a sense of collective purpose. Right now, the U.S. is like a country with just kind of adrift politically. It's like you have like the ethno-nationalists versus it's just a lot kind of going on. There is no collective identity. I suspect, although I don't know if it's advisable, but I suspect there may be an opportunity to kind of engage America's self-identity as a global leader and really kind of tap into this can-do spirit that's there. I was on a panel with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on MSNBC, a town hall on the Green New Deal, and the host, Chris Hayes, asked, is the Green New Deal socialist? And about 10 people in this huge auditorium started clapping. 10 people, right? I don't know what that laugh means. Anyway, 10 people. And, we engaged the question. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, call it what you want to call it, right? We have market failures that we have to address, right? It's the best answer. Although he didn't really ask me, I just kind of jumped in and said, this idea that the Green New Deal is socialist. Now, mind you, this is the U.S., right? Which isn't a purely capitalist. We have a social democracy for the rich, right? So this idea that the Green New Deal is socialist is actually a political strategy, I said, right? To make the Green New Deal sound wholly un-American, right? And this is what I'm interested in. I'm trying to figure out how we speak American to get this Green New Deal done. And I added, I couldn't imagine something more American than the Green New Deal, which is turning a crisis into an opportunity, right? To rebuild the economy and lead the world. And I maybe that last part I shouldn't have said, but the idea here is that what could be more American just tapping into the ingenuity of the people, right, to change our society to something better than what we have now, right, and create more jobs that pay higher wages. You know, what could be more American than that? I wonder if that language has limits. I know it does, but I would love to kind of discuss that with you. So that's the World War II mobilization, which is the backbone of the Green New Deal as we're proposing it. The next photo kind of jumps in history to the Moonshot. And this is another kind of American story that I think resonates. I've given versions of this presentation, and somebody yelped with joy when they saw this footprint. I spent most of my childhood aspiring to be an astronaut, right? Someone said, "Oh," and then until I encountered calculus, and I was particularly inspired by Kennedy's moon mission speech. This was back when we had the CD-ROM encyclopedias. I remember that, and there was like this little sound bite. This little recording that they had, and Kennedy said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things," right? Because that goal will serve to organize and measure our country's energy and skills, right? It was a wildly fanciful ambition. The technology did not exist, right? And to be clear, transitioning to a green economy is not as simple as a moonshot. It is a series of technological moonshots. But tapping into that national project, that shared purpose, there's an opportunity here. And to be clear, the moonshot wasn't just about science. It was about survival. It was proving that the American system, right, could outdo the Soviet system. That's what the moonshot was all about. We forget often in the U.S. that we spent most of the space race behind the ball severely. And the moonshot was like, what they call in football a Hail Mary. I'm so American anyway. The whole idea was to catch up and assert some level of technological sophistication. And so today we find ourselves in a very similar situation. The U.S. is a laggard when it comes to, green energy. And when it comes to the technologies that we need to move forward to a clean economy. We're not even on the map in some places. Indeed, we are making decisions to go backwards. And so the Green New Deal is a series of technology moonshots, and like the space race before it, the Green New Deal could be construed as a great national effort, an exercise in survival. And it goes without saying that transforming every sector of the economy is difficult. Yeah, it's hard. And in most cases, actually in some cases, a lot of the technology that we need to actually do this doesn't exist, or it's in its infancy, and crucially, not commercially viable. The interesting thing is, an aircraft carrier isn't commercially viable either, right? And yet we don't expect ExxonMobil to pay, I forget it's the 6th or 7th fleet that patrols the Middle East, right? We don't expect Exxon to pay for that. Right? Do they even pay taxes? I don't know. But we do know that there is, from a fiscal policy standpoint, tremendous purchasing capacity of the federal government with this huge budget. That you can make technology viable by just buying it over and over and over again. It becomes better and better and better. This mic is not one I'm using, but this idea of things not being technologically viable cannot stop us. We have to be creative and find ways to use the might of a very strong economy, one of the largest economies in the world, if not the largest, obviously, right? That has a sovereign currency, right? And tremendous spending potential, right? To literally make markets, right? And so that is something that we have to really embrace, the same way we did for those warplanes in World War II. And so throwing the entire might of like human ingenuity at these problems, massive public investments, and not just research and development, but deployment as well, through a network of research universities and labs and companies and every other imaginable entity to solve this problem. We can do this. And the playbook has been written. We just have to alter those plays for the current context. And so that's why we think the moonshot is a good example. We have to do many, many moonshots to move to the type of energy generation that we want. I think there is an educational opportunity here. You know, I used to teach kids kind of practical computer science. I'm like a self-taught hobbyist, more curious programmer that would never land a real job in the industry, but found a way to inspire young people to at least open the door and show them the basics, and they could surpass me like within a summer and then teach me stuff. It was like really savvy. And what we learned at my organization, Coder Space, was that thinking about technology alone wasn't as interesting as connecting computer science to all the other disciplines. So connecting computer science to literature and doing interactive fiction, right? Connecting computer science to the natural sciences and programming sensors, and then working with the Adler Planetarium to send those sensors up to the very edge of space, above 99% of the atmosphere, which is the same conditions as it is on Mars, which is interesting. So I told the kids we're going to Mars. And then collecting data with the sensors that the kids program themselves, right? And then collecting that, like chasing that sensor when it parachutes down through a cornfield in Indiana, and then retrieving that data and then running analysis on that data with some Python scripts and Python data analysis libraries. So now you're in mathematics. And making these connections. I see a tremendous opportunity to re-enliven and renew America's educational system around this question of survival. There is no way to talk about climate action without talking about everything, you know? And what a way to inspire a new generation of leaders and thinkers that could take us to the next transition that we need to make, right? Because we're never done, you know? And there's also geopolitical implications. Right now with the Belt and Road, China's Belt and Road, while they're moving to renewables, they're more than happy to send workers and material to build fossil fuel power generating capacity in developing nations, right? What's the alternative? There is no alternative, is there? So is there a way for the US and other countries who can to develop technologies, build domestic capacity, and then be helpful without being hegemonic, right? There are geopolitical implications to this climate conversation that extend beyond just survival. And we need to be very realistic about that and have a substantive alternative in a way that is not just extending America's hegemonic influence, but is being very aware of some of the bad actors that have joined the U.S. and kind of just causing chaos in the world. And so I think we have to think through that as well. It goes without saying, my father retired from the Army after 30-something years, right? The lesson is not lost on me that changing America's domestic energy economy necessarily changes our international policy and military strategy completely, right? And so we have to have that conversation. That's an underappreciated conversation that I have not seen many people having, but a Green New Deal can open the door to begin thinking about what does that mean? How does the US show up in the world as being helpful without being hegemonic? And so moving on to the last slide, there we are. We've talked about the Green New Deal as a mobilization, right? We talked the Green New Deal as a moonshot or series of moonshots. The Green New Deal is also a movement, maybe more appropriately, a movement of movements. Obviously, this is a very famous picture, but we see that in this moment in the US, a gathering of the justice movements, economic justice, labor, right? Environmental and climate justice. The indigenous justice fights that have been going on for centuries, right? All of this coming and converging around this Green New Deal, which is a proposal that is at the scale of the climate crisis, but also at the scale of all the other crises that have been simmering and ignored in the US. You know, I have a background in that neighborhood development stuff, which got me into the teaching young people CS. And I kept bumping my head against the structures that assume that a certain unemployment rate is okay, that assume that there is a racial caste, that assume that the hood will always be the hood, right? These are the structures that must change, right, to truly accomplish a society where people have a fair shot at a decent living and life. Yes, we have record low unemployment, but we also have record high number of jobs it takes to put food on the table, right? And when people put that out there, they try to poo-poo that, oh, you don't know math or something. It's like really ridiculous. So it doesn't make sense. I do use rideshare, in some of my travels. And everybody that I talk to has another gig or two, I asked one woman in Chicago, I said, she worked at the airport as a city worker, right? Did a part-time hustle doing hair and drove Lyft. And was a single parent, right? And kid was in a good school, and that takes tremendous social capital and savvy to navigate Chicago's corrupt school system to get your kid in the right school. So this is a phenomenal woman. And I said, when have you taken a vacation? She's like, it's been a while. I said, we were talking about the Green New Deal. I said, the Green New Deal is really about giving American worker a vacation. Like we had paid vacation, somebody told me, right? Paid, we gotta be very clear. We had a record low number of American workers going on vacation this last summer, and yet record high spending. We know who's going on vacation, right? And so we've got to bring this stuff down to earth. We want better food. We do want better air and water, right? We also want good work that pays well, that is dignified, and time with our families, right? What does it mean to bring the Green New Deal down to that? And so we're seeing this gathering of justice movements. The Green New Deal is very capacious. It's a framework for addressing these interlocking systems as such. And some see this as a weakness. We see it as a strength. The comprehensiveness of the Green New Deal is its power. We're seeing people who did not see their work situated in the climate fight as directly related to the climate fight, right? And this matters fundamentally for actually winning a Green New Deal. But indeed, there is no way, and I don't really have to go into this here, there's no way to truly transition to a zero carbon economy without interrogating and challenging the logic of the economy that exploits people and extracts from the earth. One of the economists who inspires us is Mariana Mazzucato, and she says behind the climate crisis, behind the economic crises, is really a crisis in thinking, right? And that is kind of at the heart of what New Consensus is really trying to figure out. How do we work at the level of theory, translate some of like the insights of how the economy actually works into actual practical proposals that people can understand, that people can run on, that people can communicate, and make the Green New Deal a reality, not by dumbing it down, watering it down, and trying to bring a 501c3, bringing people who don't want to take action into the fold, but by replacing the people who are in Congress, in the State House, in City Hall, with people who want to see this agenda happen, right? So what we've done at New Consensus is inverted the policy and politics equation, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. How much time do we have?
About half an hour.
Perfect. Inverting this policy and politics conversation, right? Usually it's like, what can we get done in this Congress? What deals can we cut, right? But this is a crisis that does not allow for cutting deals, right? That's not really an option. And so what we've seen is since, the takeover of Congress by a party that has completely denied the reality of climate breakdown, and the White House with somebody who is denying the reality of climate breakdown and taking the country backward, what we're seeing in many progressive circles is an abandonment of the role of the federal government, right, in addressing the crisis. Let's focus on states and localities where we can actually get some things done. But I think we do that at our peril, because the federal government in the American system is incredibly powerful. And although it may be tactically wise to focus on state and local, we have to continually assert the fundamental role that the federal government can play in attacking the climate crisis. And the case example is that California has always been the leader in setting fuel efficiency standards and energy efficiency standards for the country. It adopts a standard for a particular appliance, and about 30 years later, the federal government catches up, right? And I was told by a smart analyst that said, this system has worked quite well. And me having a productive naivete on all these different policy issues, I'm like, well, that doesn't sound productive. That doesn't sound like it's working at all. And then, of course, while we're having this conversation, the federal government is suing California for having higher standards. So this gentleman's agreement, these kind of cultural features, and Trump is really kind of showing how much of the American system is kind of cultural, right? And based off of the way things are done, right? They didn't work for us then, they still don't work. We could preserve those systems or just like create new ones. But the idea here is that the federal government has tremendous power to preempt states constitutionally, right? And all hinges, the California law, all hinges on this one act. It depends on which law you're applying to that situation. That's a pretty weak regulatory framework to wage the climate fight. So we have to recover, remember, and embrace the role of the federal government while not crowding out state and local action, right? The federal government has the power, the capital, the monetary and fiscal tools to make climate action not just a reality, but to do so in a way that includes the majority of the American public, everyone rather, into the new future that we intend to bring about with the Green New Deal. So I'm going to end there and open it up for discussion. Not Q&A, y'all, discussion, okay?
All right. So we have 2 mic runners. Let's get some hands up, and we'll do three interventions and questions, and then Damon can reply. So we've got one up here at the front. Thank you. We've got one right there. And let's go at the back for the third one. Let's start here.
Hi. We were talking about healthcare in one of our discussions yesterday, and as part of, you were saying there's movements within this movement, and wanting to have better care systems for our vulnerable population, whether it be mental health, seniors, disability, and because it's a real fight. It seems like all the time, short-staffed. Just having that quality of care service so that people can have a quality of life. How does that fit in with the new Green Deal?
How do you think it fits in?
I was really trying to work that out in my head, that sense of advocacy.
I think it fits in, right? And I don't know if the question is how does it fit in? I think it fits in, right? If you look at the New Deal, and this is like one of the few ways I actually reference the New Deal, just look at all the acts, right? The American Tourism Bureau, right? And also the Tennessee Valley Authority, right? Like, what did those have in relation to each other, right? Very little, but it was something that the country had to do, and there was this package of proposals to strengthen the economy and correct some failures. So I think likewise we have a healthcare crisis, right? And there's a huge debate. It's actually, I think it's worthwhile. Much to our chagrin, healthcare is like dominating the political conversation in the U.S. It's very personal and it's very real. I honestly believe that to answer your question, and so I think it fits in, but I think a way that it definitely does fit in is that insofar as one's health care is tied to one's employment, right, it makes transitioning to a clean and green economy that much harder, right? If we have no, I don't like calling it a safety net. If there's better words, I want to hear them. If we have no floor, right, yeah, you're going to hold on to that one job, right? And also, let's say you're not going to be phased out. You're not going to like start that new venture because you'd rather just like keep your health care, right? Mm-hmm. Companies now are spending more and more on healthcare and starting to kind of like send those costs over to employees, but also take these like low cost healthcare plans. So it's not working. And so healthcare for all not only raises the floor, but makes any type of economic transition that much easier to happen because people's livelihood and basic quality of life is not fundamentally altered. It's just the nature of the work that you're doing. So I think it's fundamental. I was speaking with a psychologist yesterday over the dinner, and she was saying that she was assigned to 15 schools. I'm like, in Canada? Like, that sounds like, where do you live again? I said, well, how many schools should you have? She said 1, probably 3 if we're pushing it. So we're like 5 times over pushing it, right? So again, we're talking about basic quality of life. The beauty here is that, and you know this on your part, you know, for the US is moving to I would argue, a single public payer system that can just kind of at volume just like throw resources at this. But also there's challenges to that, and I would love to kind of better understand those. But I think it fits for real. And I think raising the floor is definitely part of it. But I think inserting that conversation, like this is what's broken here and this is who's left out, I think just highlighting that, and this is how it reduces all of our quality of life, that is the Green New Deal conversation. So I think just argue it on your terms, and be at the table and publish stuff.
What has come to mind for me in our conversation here is that, like, employment for those who are underemployed is definitely.
In what sense?
Well, for people with disabilities and mental health disorders, they are underemployed. Yeah. And certainly, you know, to create programs and stuff like that where they can create a green world. Certainly, there's a lot of work there.
Sure.
I'm Jason, and I'll make a brief statement and then ask a question which is more functional than policy driven. So I grew up 450 kilometers north of here in Fort McMurray, which is the epicenter of the fossil fuel industry in the country and definitely the province. And I've moved along on a personal level on this environmental question in the sense that, you know, even 2 years ago, I wasn't really opposed to the idea of building pipelines. And 2 years later, I've arrived at a point very recently where I don't think it's a good idea. But when I talk to other workers, people I grew up with in the community of Fort McMurray, I find it difficult to have that elevator conversation, that 30-second conversation that can convince a worker who's making $150,000 a year that it's a good idea to transition our economy away from this. Yep. And so I was wondering if you had any ideas around those elevator conversations to talk to on-the-ground workers about getting them to move along like I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I live on the south side of Chicago. Like you, in those conversations, you have much more, right? Experience than I do, right? I wouldn't even presume I would love to talk to you in the hallway to learn more about how these conversations go. But I have that is the question. And from my standpoint and vantage point, I have very little to add to your understanding, save from framing, you know, which I know probably won't resonate. It's like, sure, wonderful. What does that mean for me, you know? So I would love to keep the conversation. I would love to huddle with you in the hallway. But yeah, I don't have anything to add. I would love for you to kind of share, if we can, unless we want to keep going, how your conversations have been going. 30-second elevator pitch is pretty tough, but how have the other kind of longer conversations gone? That's what I would like to know. Yeah.
All right, so we got one question over here, and then Shima in the back.
Okay. Hey, thanks. Wonderful talk. I actually want to add a little bit to what Jason was saying over there. In the heart of the fossil fuel industry, we definitely have institutional barriers to moving forward on solutions. And I think there are 3 major institutions that we have to acknowledge are standing in the way. And one is the industry, right? The industry holds significant political and economic power. And part of how we have that conversation, brother, is we have to let people come to the understanding that the industry doesn't give a damn about the workers in this province, right? So we have another institution in this province, and that is the UCP. And the UCP wants to move us further and further backwards away from climate action, and they want to make things worse for workers. And I think more and more we can have more of that conversation and talk to people about that. Right now, we have another institution, which is the NDP, that is standing in the way of progress on climate. They are still advocating for new pipelines. When I opened up the platforms of both parties in the election to look for anything that said we were going to take science-based action on climate change in this province, it wasn't there. When I looked for anything I could tell people in my family who work in oil and gas that either of those parties was going to do anything to support them in a just transition away from fossil fuels, it wasn't there. We were focused on austerity, on paying down the deficit, and if we belong to these institutions, we need to be challenging them because they're leaving us short, and that has to be a part of the conversation.
Hi, thanks for an enlightening talk. I just want to throw out ideas about how, because what's striking me as really significant about your presentation is that the advancement of the idea of the Green New Deal has to do with alteration and development of a cultural sensibility that is attuned to the type of storytelling that has to go on for people to understand the functionality of the thing, and not to get sort of trapped in the ideological warfare or the semantic warfare of like what's gonna happen, how and when. Like I feel like, my background is I'm a spoken word poet. I'm telling stories day and night all the time. I'm always telling stories. I think some of the demonstrative sort of value of this presentation has been just like tools, the presentation of a toolbox, so to speak, for how to sort of frame the introduction of the idea of a sweeping transformative economic, political, and cultural movement. I think that it would be cool to talk about, either in this particular discussion session or in the hall or wherever, ways in which our stories interconnect and our stories can have some kind of continuity that shows, that answers those questions, that answers the question of, like, that would eventually answer all the questions down to this level of specificity, even if just in active response of like how many bills, and like what are you going to do about, I don't know, unemployment. Like I think that is the major key, because in my experience of late, of hearing about the Green New Deal from this locality, I have been sort of confronted with all of this sort of like shrugging of the shoulders and wondering about what the deal, you know, like, and I'm like, okay, cool, but that's an invitation more than a barrier, in my opinion.
That's amazing. And just a quick response. I really appreciate the artists in the room. I almost started with a disclaimer saying this presentation will be more poetry than prose. Right, we had this saying, I'm not sure they'll use it here, you campaign in poetry and govern in prose, right? And yes, I completely agree that taking this narrative kind of poetry approach, right, opens the possibility even for a conversation and some shared kind of solution making, envisioning, right? And this is why I think artists are critical. What I love about the Green New Deal movement is that there is an eye for this. And I think there's more to be done. You know, it's Sunday, and so, you know, in my religious tradition, there's a preacher who said, it is the artist who can hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope, right? And so I really appreciate that response. I would definitely want to talk to you after this and get your information. That's what it's going to take. And you pretty much, I should just had you give the presentation. Yeah.
We've got 10 minutes, so let's have 3 really quick questions. Okay, I see one over there, right here, and Mike at the back.
Okay, well, Thank you. I really appreciate the topic of this discussion this morning. I think it's so important. It was just last year that climate scientists came out and told us we had basically 12 years, 11 years to get working on this, and we seem to have lost that sense of urgency. I think every single conversation we ever have needs to be couched in this idea that climate change is real. The science have told us we believe in science and we need to act. So I agree the NDP did nothing to move that conversation to a just transition. I'll say I picked up Naomi Klein's new book, On Fire, yesterday at Audrey's Books. Read the epilogue last night, and she really did connect how a Green New Deal can address populism, can address that feeling, those divisions in our society, because we will have a common sense of purpose and will work towards something. So I appreciate that you also noted that can be really inspiring, and it can move the conversation. So I guess it's more of a comment, but thank you.
And I would add maybe, hopefully, but I agree.
This is more of an ask for some help here, I think, if we're going to have a discussion. As I watched your presentation, you talked about World War II, and the finality of World War II was to beat the fascists. Moonshot, finality was get to the moon. What is the end goal of the Green Deal? Because as I've listened, I've heard you say that some of our candidates running in the States have a form of a Green Deal, which doesn't help me because I still can't put in my mind what is the end goal. This feels more like solving world peace right now than getting to this transition. How do I do my part? Is my part to get to that goal for everybody, or is my part just to do, I guess, my part? It's a very broad. How do we make it into a? It's almost the question of the elevator speech. Okay. So does she.
So to hit on that briefly, and I appreciate the question. I think I think his name is Hawken, who wrote Drawdown. He's contributed, I think, a very objective scientific goal, right, which is stop emitting carbon and pull down X amount of carbon, right? And here's the various ways that we can do it. So that's an objective goal. Anything that doesn't do that is not getting the job done. What we're adding to the broader conversation is the way you build support for that. And the only way that ought to be done, and I would argue can be done, is to do so in a way that creates a better livelihood, right, for people in your country, right, and for local communities, and to objectively repair and prioritize those who have been at the target of like the system that we have now that put all that carbon up there, right? And so they're very objective things, right? So I think there are versions of climate action that are, how do I say this? There could be a version of climate action that keeps our economy as stratified as it is now, right? It'd be very difficult, right, to the point of folks who make $150,000 a year to make the case for a transition to a clean economy where it will be stratified, if not more so than it is now, right? And so we can objectively add to that. I think this is the question. We can objectively add to the goal where it's like improving people's incomes and quality of life, right? There is access to health care and universal family care, right? Where your school is well funded. Like these are the objective things that you can talk about to say the Green New Deal that does not include these things that will substantively improve your life is not the Green New Deal, right? Or is not a Green New Deal, right? It is a new deal for American farmers. It is a new deal for workers. It is a new deal for, frankly, parents, right? Small businesses, and just go down the list, right? It's changing a structure that has crippled the economy and actively marginalized and increasingly like the majority of people, right? And so it's not solving world peace. So just to be clear, these are very objective targets. I think the challenge is making those targets not in the Vox media, DC circuit kind of issue policy area targets, but targets of the lived experience, family life, work, right? The food I eat, the air we breathe, right? Those are the targets that I think we focus on and talk about how of that is all this other stuff? It's a great question. I don't have final answers, but I think there are leaders in the movement who have a much crisper version of that than I do. But I'm really interested in finding ways to communicate the goal or the end state to people who are too busy for policy debates, right? So.
Here I am. I read your name. You are a drummer. You drum up support for new ideas. And also, I'd like to quickly give you an honorary degree in history. I think you gave the best overview and short history of New Deal and what it meant.
Oh, cool.
So I will write that up for you. Now, I want to tell you that I feel very inspired, but one word I have not yet heard from you, and I call it's the concept of the religious factor in the United States. And you don't seem to live in Fantasyland, but I like everybody to take up this title, Fantasyland. It's a book by Bruce Anderson, and it gives the religious, Kurt Anderson, and it gives the religious history of the United States, and it culminates in explaining why so many religious people, millions, vote for, what is his name again? Donald Trump. So, that religious factor, how do you deal with it in your mobilization? I am a citizen of two countries. You were still talking about the United States could be the leader. Ha ha, forget it. You may have to look at a small country like Holland that suffered from the Dutch disease, and if you don't know what it is, they suddenly got very greedy and they started drilling for gas and became very rich in the small province of Groningen, an infamous province now, Groningen, the northern part of Holland, and that they had a kind of like, it was going to on the road to Damascus, they had a conversion. Oh my gosh, this is not a good idea, so now we have to stop fracking, and the Dutch people may all disappear, as you know, in the water. I want you to maybe address this. How can you stop, or how can you change that religious factor? I wish you would speak to that.
Got it. So,
I'm an ex-Calvinist.
This is wonderful. And in America, we're all Calvinists at the end of the day, in some form or fashion, no matter what religion or denomination you are. There must be pain, right? But it's interesting you asked that question because, letting the cat out the bag a bit, I came up in the kind of Protestant, kind of black Protestant Christian tradition, the Church of God in Christ, which isn't known for its social progressiveness, but definitely was very much, literally the seat of the Church of God in Christ is where Martin Luther King gave his last speech. It was where he spent his last night on earth at Mason Temple. It was a denomination created by emancipated, enslaved African. And the entire theology can be summed up in one word, yes, Lord, right? And it's very powerful and animates my soul to this day, even though I'm not part of that denomination. And I studied religion in grad school, studied econ in undergrad, religion in grad school, and landed at this insight that the poet mentioned, which is how we tell stories matters, right? And for me, religion is a grammar that we can access, right, to tell stories. And so we're seeing a lot of religious groups and religions passing, I think the United Church of Christ passed a resolution supporting the Green New Deal. But I think how we mobilize religious myth and symbols and grammar is going to be fundamental. When it comes to how to pay for it, there's a story that I tell people, if I may, this Sunday, right? Do you mind if I just go briefly? They say there's not enough money to pay for the transition, right? You've heard that, right? It's too expensive. I told NPR that question betrays a fundamental lack of literacy in how the monetary system works. Obviously, I was not quoted in their article. But what I've told people kind of on the side is that there's a story of this guy called Jesus, right? Who was hanging out with his 12 friends, his crew. They called them disciples. And they were over there by a lake. And 5,000 families kind of assembled because he had become kind of famous by then. And they're teaching and doing their thing with these folks. And the disciples say, hey, we have to feed these folks. No, I'm sorry, that's not what happened. Jesus said, hey, we have to feed these people. right? You know the story, right? And the disciples, so Jesus said, we have to feed these people, these 5,000 families. The disciple says, Jesus, we don't have enough money to feed the people. We should send them to the town so that they could buy their own food. And Jesus said, I'm not talking about money. I said feed. Notice he didn't say we need to buy food for these people. He said feed the people. What's interesting is that they were in a field that could have easily been a place where there was wheat grown, and they were near a lake where there was fish, right? There was bounty in the earth, and the disciples were constrained about how much money was in their purse, right? I think what the insight here, it's not about a miracle about fishes and loaves, right? The way I read that narrative is that there's a separation between the currency and the actual economy, right? And there's that scarce currency created by Caesar that Jesus definitely wasn't a person down with, right? Then there's the actual economy, which was the God that they were all trying to understand and participate in the creative action of humankind with, right? And so that separation, and that same person lifted up a coin in a different story and said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, currency, and render unto God which is God's. And I think it is our responsibility to make that case. I think there are many, many stories that we could tell, right, that can help open up new horizons of understanding and possibility. So I think you're right, and I think that work is happening. Yeah, I don't know. That may be an argument for modern monetary theory. I don't know, but I'm not sure if that resonates. But yeah, I think it's a good point. I think it's a good point.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
That does take us to our time. I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights and certainly your stories with all of us this morning.
Oh. So